I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today for what I think is going to be a really, really exciting webinar. We have some incredible industry experts joining us today to share with you their thoughts and experiences. We think it's just so important to bring this type of conversation to the table for all of our partners, our clients, everyone involved in this industry, because it is an industry type of event that's hitting us, and we want to make sure that we are all prepared, and we're going to share that information with you.
As the economy has really progressed along, I would say the best case scenario where the virus has come under control, we've been able to gradually reopen. You really are seeing people come off, just generally speaking, even if they did need it. And for us, we saw our level of payment deferrals peak in May at a percent. That has come down to the end of June at around 13.7%. So a fairly significant drop off from May to June. And our hope is that that continues on into July, August, and September. So that there's really no deferral cliff per se, but rather a bit of a hill.
Well, I'm no great lover of the word cliff. I prefer a hill. I'm going to turn us to property trends, just to dig into this. And obviously, when we talk about housing markets and trends in particular property segments, that affects the entire book, and potentially the scope is national. So the question I would have is the permanent impact of COVID-19 on how we live and work remains to be seen. I think we'll start this one with Nadine. Nadine, I'm wondering, given CMHC's mandate, what changes do you foresee to housing demand and supply coming out of COVID-19?
Yeah, I'll offer a few thoughts. Starting off with, where the supply demand is going. We've all seen, I'm sure you all have seen CMHC's forecast in the spring, forecasting house price. And we continue to believe that will happen, which result of, low interest rates and new listings versus supply out there in the underlying demands. We also, we believe we talked a little bit about the delayed impact, of course, because of the government support, that house price will fall probably later in 2020 or 2021 as government support will unwind and bankruptcy will likely increase. To your point, Catherine, there is going to be a shift in how people, the jobs that we see yesterday versus the job that we're going to see in the future post-COVID. Certainly, people have been laid off, people have been impacted, temporary jobs are being replaced by permanent jobs, and that we'll see certainly a different behavior in the people that will move between urban and rural. And without a doubt, housing will continue to be at the fundamental of how we will be recuperating from this crisis. And so for CMHC, this crisis is offering opportunities for sure. Perhaps, conversion of hotels that are closing, conversion of office space that are closing. How can we recycle that and offer more supply out there, especially in urban areas? But we have to seize those opportunities, and definitely with the national housing strategy, really work with our partners out there to increase supplies.
We do see a big difference in trends sort of in oil producing regions versus non-oil producing regions. So our concerns for drops are really in Calgary, Edmonton, Johns, probably Saskatchewan. The rest of the housing market, at least right now, they seem to be responding quite favorably. And one of the really interesting trends is that areas like Halifax and Moncton appear to be doing really well. So it appears that we may even see some migration, perhaps out of Alberta back into the Atlantic provinces.
A lot of influence or rather interest from the investor community on, as a public company, well, what are your losses going to be? How bad? Will they slowly rise and then peak at a massive level, or will they be front loaded? And of course, what we're trying to do is reflect the actual emergence of loss with the recognition that, as I'm sure Curtis and Nadine would agree, 2021 is likely when we will see more of the peak of delinquency and losses, not 2020.
Yeah. I like to say that there's never been a time where people are more interested in what's going to happen, and where it's also been simultaneously more difficult to predict what's going to happen than ever before.
Absolutely.
So if you could give one piece of advice or recommendation to a government policymaker at any level or in any sphere, what would it be?
As a Crown Corporation, obviously, we have we provide advice to government on an ongoing basis. But going back to the challenge of supply and demand that we've talked about a little bit earlier, we will have to think about this question of densification. It's probably number one top of mind right now for CMHC. And it's around densification, obviously, of major urban areas where people obviously are migrating, creating communities, inclusivity, and obviously being close to work. And so my advice to government is how do we work together at various government levels, municipality, provinces, in order to get to this question of densification in urban areas. As we know, cost of land is probably the biggest barrier. And so we have no choice but to build up. And so how do we, influence various level of government to help with this question and really think about supply differently?
The main advice would be, let's keep doing what we're doing from a public policy. What I wouldn't want to see is, something like, say, the CMHC changes being implemented for the whole industry, because to me, that would really constrict that first-time home buying lending. And we've seen from other recessions, whether it be in Spain or Ireland after the financial crisis, if you pull back lending too much in the middle of a recession, that can actually have a downward spiral effect. So for me right now is, to OSFI and to the Department of Finance, don't change the sandbox right now. Now is not the time. Let's get through this pandemic, and then we can have those sort of more intellectual conversations about what the sandbox for first-time home buyers should be. But don't do it in the next 18 to 24 months.
Great. And Stuart, last but not least, advice for any level of government.
Yeah, I think our position would be simply to just not act too quickly in unwinding. They acted quickly to put a lot of measures in place, which was appropriate. But I would say the path they're on, which I think is the right path, is to be very thoughtful and considerate of how you wean people off these measures or wind them down, because they are working. Clearly, there's a cost to them, and we can't keep them up forever, and we do need to wind them down. But I think the pace at which we wind them down needs to be very thoughtful, so that you don't trigger sort of a cliff again, if you will, in how people manage their finances.
I've really enjoyed this discussion today. It was great to hear that our mortgage insurers came into an unusual situation relatively prepared. Great to hear some signs of optimism about the Canadian consumer, the profile of the payment deferrals, at least based on experience to date. And then, interesting insights on where the property values are going based on some of the fundamentals that we've seen. Love to hear the optimism about perhaps a hill and not a cliff. And it was very interesting to hear the differences in the origination changes. But I have to say that your advice on caution for government and how to create a more sustainable supply and demand balance, I think these were great insights from the three of you.
Thank you very much to the whole panelists and Catherine for moderating so well. I know it seems like a very Canadian type of conversation of everyone being friendly, but it's nice to see a lot of unity around the thinking process, a lot of checks and balances in that process as well. To our panelists, thank you so much for taking the time and coming together and answering those difficult questions. Thank you very much to all the participants who took the time to join us. We hope all you and your colleagues and your families are all safe and sound going forward, and that we weather this storm, because I think there is a rainbow at the end of it that we're all starting to see.